A black honor student walks into class with a scholarship letter in his hand. By lunch, he's in handcuffs for disrupting the lesson. The teacher says she feared for her life because he raised his voice during a debate. The principal calls it a misunderstanding. The video says otherwise. Millions have already watched. But what the cameras didn't catch. That's the part they tried to erase. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Jalen Rivers never spoke, unless he had something to say. At 17, he'd mastered the art of choosing his words, especially in a place like Prescott Ridge High, where polished hallways gleamed with privilege and silence was expected from students who looked like him. He was one of 6 black students in the entire senior class, and he carried that statistic on his shoulders like armor. On a humid Tuesday morning, Room 214 buzzed with the aftertaste of a heated debate. The topic: the Reconstruction Era, a period of American healing. Diane Whitmore, the school's longest-tenured history teacher, paced confidently near the whiteboard, her voice crisp as she summarized how the country moved forward after the Civil War. Jalen's hand rose slowly. There was a brief pause, that kind of anticipatory silence that fell when Jalen spoke in class. His voice, when it came, was respectful but unafraid. "Miss Whitmore," he said, sitting up straighter, "if the Reconstruction Era was about healing, why were black codes enforced to control freed slaves, and why did racial violence spike instead of decline?" A few students shifted uncomfortably. The temperature in the room seemed to change. Ms. Whitmore's lips tightened. "That's not what we're discussing today, Jalen. Let's stay on topic." Jalen didn't back down. "But this is the topic. You said America was healing. I'm just asking, healing for who?" A few students glanced around nervously. The air felt heavier now. Jalen wasn't yelling. He wasn't even leaning forward. But something about his presence, his insistence, caused Ms. Whitmore's expression to falter. Her face froze in an unfamiliar mix of confusion and quiet offense. "You're being combative," she said sharply. The word dropped like a stone into water. A few students blinked. Others looked down at their desks. "I'm asking a question based on the reading," Jalen replied, his voice even. "It's not combative to ask for context." The air tightened like a noose. "I don't like your tone," she snapped. "My tone?" Jalen echoed, incredulous. His voice hadn't changed once. Ms. Whitmore took a step back from her desk. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the classroom phone. Her eyes never left Jalen. "I'm calling the SRO," she said loudly. Intentionally loud. "You're making me feel unsafe." A stunned silence swept the room. "Unsafe?" Some students exchanged glances. Others pulled out their phones, unsure if they were allowed to record. Jalen's mouth opened in shock. "Wait. What? I didn't do anything." He remained seated. He hadn't moved from his chair. "You've been aggressive since you raised your hand," she continued, voice rising. "I've asked you to stop interrupting. You are escalating." Jalen looked around. No one spoke, not even Rachel, who had nodded at his question minutes earlier. Not even Devin, his lab partner, who always claimed to get it. "I'm not escalating," Jalen said again, more to the room than to her. But Ms. Whitmore wasn't listening anymore. She pressed a button on the classroom phone and asked the front desk to send security. Then, to Jalen's horror, she pulled out her cell phone. "911, what's your emergency?" "They likely asked," she replied, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Yes, I have a student refusing to comply. He's being threatening and I'm concerned for my safety." Jalen's stomach dropped. Several students gasped audibly now. But no one spoke. Not one person stood up. Ms. Whitmore was shaking slightly, but her voice remained firm, almost rehearsed. Her eyes darted toward the classroom door like she wanted it all to be over, as if removing Jalen would restore order. He sat frozen, both hands on his desk, legs still. Outside, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Fast, firm. He wanted to scream. He wanted someone to say something. To stop this madness. To remember he was Jalen, the student who tutored others in math, the captain of the debate team, the boy who had never even been late to class. But none of that mattered now. To Ms. Whitmore, he had become a silhouette, a symbol, a threat, not for what he did, but for what he represented. And once that switch flipped in her mind, nothing else he said could reach her. From outside, he heard the click of radios and a static voice. "We've got a report from room 2. His breathing quickened, but he forced himself to remain still, dignified, silent. But inside he was screaming. One student near the back slowly began recording. Another quietly slid their phone under the desk, trembling. And then suddenly, it appeared. Through the narrow classroom window, just above the second-floor lockers, red and blue lights spun to life, casting ghostly colors onto the walls. A patrol car had pulled up to the school entrance. Jalen didn't move. He couldn't. His heart pounded in his chest like a warning drum. And for the first time in his life, he truly felt what it meant to be seen as dangerous for simply existing. As the door handle began to turn and the officer's shadow darkened the hallway, Jalen's eyes locked on Miss Whitmore's face, and he noticed to his shock that she was smiling. By dawn, Jalen Rivers had become a national headline, though not the way he ever imagined. While most of Prescott Ridge still slept, the internet ignited with fury, disbelief, and viral rage. The shaky clip Sarah Klein uploaded had already been shared over 1 million times across platforms. TikTokers were stitching reactions. Twitter threads dissected every second. Instagram Reels blasted the moment. A calm black teen was cuffed for challenging a history lesson. The hashtags lit up in bright digital ink. Justice for Jalen. Classroom Karen. Cuffed for questioning. He was just asking. The original video had no narration, but it didn't need any. The footage spoke volumes. Jalen seated calmly, asking a historical question. Miss Whitmore's stiff posture. The officers entering aggressively. The cuffs snapping shut. Within hours, national news anchors were quoting it live. A Virginia high school is facing backlash this morning after a viral video shows a black honor student being handcuffed in class. The teacher called 911, citing a threat, but from what the video shows, he was simply asking a question. Cable news headlines ranged from measured to incendiary. Some called it another example of systemic bias in schools. Others openly labeled it a racist abuse of authority inside education's most trusted spaces. And then came the comments from former students. Under the video, one comment stood out. Miss Whitmore once told me I needed to talk less black if I wanted to succeed. I reported it. Nothing happened. I'm not surprised. That opened the floodgates. Former students, now college-aged, began sharing eerily similar stories. Microaggressions disguised as advice, being punished for asking questions, constantly being called disruptive, despite following the rules. One even posted a screenshot of an old complaint she filed that mysteriously disappeared from her student record. The pattern was clear, and still the school tried to play it quiet. A hastily written press release appeared on Prescott Ridge's website that afternoon. We are aware of the incident involving one of our students and are taking it very seriously. The teacher acted within protocol, and we are reviewing procedures. We ask the public to reserve judgment while we conduct a full investigation. We believe this was a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. The word hit Jalen like a slap. Sitting in his room, phone muted, he stared blankly at the statement. The school hadn't even bothered to mention his name. Just the student. No apology. No accountability. He scrolled through Twitter with dead eyes, every post with his face, his name, his moment. Strangers defending him. Strangers dissecting him. Some even questioning if he left out details. Others blaming the woke mob for attacking a white teacher's reputation. Angela stood in his doorway watching him. You need to eat something, Jay, she said softly. I'm not hungry, he muttered, not looking up. You haven't slept. I can't. His voice cracked. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that room. She walked in and sat beside him. You didn't do anything wrong. Then why does it feel like I did? He asked. Angela didn't have an answer. Not one that would undo the damage. Later that evening, a well-known civil rights attorney, Malcolm Dorsey, appeared on CNN, holding the same phone footage that the world had seen. Calm, sharp, and deliberate. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. This is not a gray area, he said. This is racial profiling in its most poisonous form. Inside a classroom, we must stop pretending schools are immune from systemic racism. They are breeding grounds for it. His firm reached out to Jalen's family within the hour. Angela took the call. Jalen listened silently, nodding once before going back to his room. He didn't feel brave. He didn't feel like a symbol. He felt shattered. Each new notification chipped away at him. He turned them off, then back on, then off again. The paradox of being visible to the world, while feeling completely alone. And then, the final blow. An email from the school. Suspension pending investigation. It was formal, cold, like a legal footnote on his humanity. Angela read it 3 times, then tossed her phone on the kitchen table. They're trying to protect themselves, she spat. They think if they suspend you, it looks like both sides did something wrong. Jalen nodded numbly. They want me to disappear. But you won't, she said. We won't let that happen. Across town, Ms. Whitmore wasn't fielding media calls or facing suspension without pay. She'd been quietly placed on administrative leave, full salary, full benefits. Neighbors avoided her house. Reporters camped outside her lawn. But inside, she sat behind drawn curtains, reading every word online. She thought of deleting her Facebook, then decided against it. A private group she belonged to had already started a fundraiser for her legal defense. One message from a parent read, "You did nothing wrong. They're turning your classroom into a battlefield. Stay strong." Another whispered support. "This is what happens when you try to discipline kids who think they're untouchable." She took a deep breath and sipped her tea. She didn't regret calling the cops. What she regretted was being caught on video. Meanwhile, the media frenzy hadn't died. It had metastasized. Think pieces flooded the web. Black silence in white classrooms. The weaponization of fragility. How white fear hurt students. Schools across the country began holding emergency meetings on bias training. Activists flooded Prescott Ridge's voicemail system. The school board announced an upcoming town hall to address community concerns. But for Jalen, the damage was already done. He'd been publicly humiliated. Marked. His nights were restless. Sleep came in broken pieces. He replayed the arrest again and again. The snap of cuffs, the silence of classmates, the emptiness in Ms. Whitmore's eyes. Trust, once his quiet armor had crumbled. Then, just after midnight, a new message pinged into his Instagram inbox. The profile was private. No photo. Just a name. WL. The message read, "You're not the only one. I have proof. We need to talk. Soon." Jalen stared at it, heart beginning to pound. He reread the words. Then again, as he reached to reply, a second message arrived. "They buried what happened to me. Don't let them do it to you." The classroom door flung open like it had been kicked, not gently turned, but forced open with urgency that didn't match the silence inside. 2 uniformed officers stormed in, their eyes immediately locked onto Jalen Rivers, who was still seated, motionless, exactly where he had been when Miss Whitmore made the call. One officer barked, "Stand up." Jalen blinked, confused. Why? I didn't." "Now," the other snapped, already walking toward him with cuffs out. Jalen's eyes darted toward Miss Whitmore, hoping, irrationally, that she might intervene, explain that there was no real threat. Instead, she stood stiffly beside her desk, her arms folded across her chest like a victorious schoolmarm. Her face was a blank slate, carved from cold restraint. "Is this necessary?" Jalen asked, standing slowly, keeping his palms open and visible. "I didn't do anything." The officer grabbed his wrist and twisted it behind his back before Jalen could finish speaking. The metal cuffs snapped around his skin with practiced ease. "Stop resisting," the officer muttered harshly, even though Jalen hadn't moved. Gasps filled the room. Phones lit up. Someone whispered, "Yo, what the?" Another student muttered, "He didn't even touch her." A third was already recording, trying to angle their phone just right beneath the desk. Jalen could hear the faint click of a camera app starting. None of it made sense. It felt like watching someone else get arrested, until he felt the cold steel cut into his wrists. Ms. Whitmore leaned slightly toward the nearest student, a white girl named Addison, and said quietly, "He brought it on himself." Her voice was calm, almost smug. Addison flinched like she'd been slapped. She looked down, suddenly unsure what to do with her phone. "Let's go," the first officer said, tugging Jalen's arm. "I didn't resist," Jalen said again, louder this time. "Why are you arresting me?" The officer didn't answer. He didn't have to. His grip tightened. Every desk passed felt like another verdict. The faces blurred. Shock, fear, pity, indifference. Jalen caught the eye of Devon, the one who always copied his math homework, who once told him, "You're basically white, bro. You'll be fine." Devon didn't say anything now. Outside the classroom, the hallway was empty. Administrators had clearly cleared the route. Students who peeked through door windows gasped and ducked away. Prescott Ridge High wasn't used to scenes like this. Not in their air-conditioned, image-obsessed bubble. Meanwhile, back in the classroom, a girl named Zara Klein, the quiet type who rarely spoke, tapped out a tweet with trembling fingers. This just happened at my school. Black honor student cuffed for asking a question. No yelling, no threat. This is insane. Justice for Jalen. She attached the shaky video clip and hit post. The internet did the rest. Angela Rivers was changing out of her scrubs when the call came. This is the school, the voice on the other end said. There's been an incident involving your son. The words your son made her heart stop. She didn't wait for details. She was already grabbing her keys, driving through red lights. Her mind raced. Not Jalen. He was her calm one, the thinker, the one who triple-checked his backpack every morning, who held the door for strangers, who volunteered to tutor at the community center. What incident? She burst through the school's front entrance. 14 minutes later, out of breath, heart pounding. The receptionist looked up, startled. I'm Jalen Rivers' mother, Angela said, voice taut. Where is he? The receptionist tried to speak calmly, but her words were useless. There's a process, ma'am. Where is my son? Security tried to intercept her, but Angela was already down the hall. She recognized the principal's office from past PTA meetings and stormed in without knocking. Principal Robert McCain, a stern-faced man with salt and pepper hair and a love for policy over people, looked up with a composed expression, too composed. We followed protocol, he said before she even asked a question. Angela stopped mid-step. Protocol? Your son became verbally aggressive in the classroom. The teacher felt threatened. We followed district safety guidelines. Angela blinked. Are you serious? You had him arrested? He was being disruptive. He asked a question. She cut in. A black child challenging a white teacher isn't aggression. It's participation. There's a video, he said stiffly. It's circulating. Angela pulled out her phone. Notifications were already flooding her screen. Texts, news pings, Twitter. And then she saw it. The video. Her son, hands cuffed, face stunned. Students whispering in the background. A white teacher staring coldly. She dropped into the nearest chair, hand to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. You really did this. McCain hesitated, clearly calculating his next words. We are conducting an internal review. Angela stood again, eyes ablaze now. You're not going to silence this. You can spin it how you want, but the truth is already out. He didn't respond. She turned and walked out without another word. By nightfall, the clip had over 2 million views. Black teen arrested in Virginia classroom teacher claimed she felt threatened. News anchors ran stories on the hour. Civil rights attorneys began weighing in on social media. Activists reposted the video with captions like, another example of how black students are criminalized in classrooms. If this was a white student, would police have been called? Angela sat beside Jalen in their living room, the sound of muted television flickering across their faces. He hadn't spoken much since returning home. The cuffs had left faint marks on his wrists. Emotional ones would take longer. I didn't raise my voice, Jalen said suddenly, his voice small. Angela turned to him. I just asked a question. That's all. I know, baby. They looked at me like I was dangerous. Like I didn't belong. Angela's heart cracked open. She wrapped her arms around him. He let her. Outside their window, camera crews had already begun setting up. Inside their home, silence hung heavy, not from guilt, but from disbelief. And across the country, people watched, shared, debated, and rallied. Some doubted him. Some called him brave. Some called him a liar. But one thing was clear. No one was staying silent anymore. As Angela stepped out the next morning to meet a reporter waiting by her driveway, her phone rang. It was the school board. The voice on the line said flatly, we think you should consider withdrawing Jalen from Prescott Ridge, for his own safety. The message from WL 1998 kept Jalen awake until the first light crept through his bedroom blinds. He read it more than a dozen times, each word chipping at the numbness that had wrapped itself around his mind like fog. Someone else had been through it, and they had proof. The next morning, Jalen's inbox lit up again. A new message from the same account. Meet me at Chambers Park. By the basketball courts. Noon. Don't tell anyone. It was signed with a name, Tamika Wells. Angela was hesitant when he told her, but she saw the urgency in her son's face. You're not going alone, she said. So they drove together and parked at the edge of the park. Jalen walked the last few steps alone. She was already there, sitting on the back of a weathered bench, hoodie pulled low, sunglasses hiding most of her face. She looked around before speaking. "You're taller than I expected," she said with a half smile. "But I guess I knew you'd grow into your voice." Jalen didn't respond at first. His mind was spinning. "You were at Prescott Ridge?" "Graduated 2 years ago," she said. "But I left with more than a diploma." She reached into her bag and handed him a worn manila folder. It was heavier than he expected. Inside, printed emails, notes, 2 USB drives labeled Audio 1 and meeting logs. "I filed a complaint against Ms. Whitmore my senior year. She used to mark me tardy, even when I was sitting in my seat. Called me hostile during a presentation on civil rights, because I used the word oppression. Once asked if my hair was naturally that messy." Jalen clenched the folder tighter. "What did the school do?" Tamika laughed, a hollow sound. "They said they'd look into it, then told me it was not a pattern, and likely a misunderstanding. I requested a transfer. They lost the paperwork. I left anyway." Quietly, Jalen sat down beside her, the weight of her story mixing with his own. "Why didn't you say something when it happened?" "I did, but no one listens when it's just one voice. I thought maybe if it happened again." She looked over at him. "And then I saw your video. And I knew." He nodded slowly, the rage building again beneath his ribcage. "I'm not letting this slide. They made me feel like I was crazy. Like it was my fault." Tamika placed a hand on the folder. "You're not crazy. She is." And they let her be. Later that evening, Jalen sat at the kitchen table with Angela and attorney Malcolm Dorsey. They had converted the dining room into a makeshift legal war room. Folders, statements, screenshots, news clippings. Dorsey listened intently as Jalen recounted what Tamika had given him. "She recorded one of their meetings," Jalen said. "And the emails, they're real, time-stamped, sent from her school account. She kept everything." Dorsey's sharp eyes scanned a printed email thread where Ms. Whitmore wrote to a colleague. "I swear these kids today see racism in everything. You can't teach history without someone crying oppression anymore." Another email casually mentioned some of the more sensitive students who need a firmer hand. The recipients, 2 other teachers and an assistant principal. "This is gold," Dorsey muttered. "This isn't just a hostile educator. It's institutional." He inserted the USB drive and played the audio. Recording Tamika's voice. "I just don't understand why I was marked absent. I was here on time." "Whitmore, I didn't see you. You all blend in when you sit in the back." "Tamika, you mean black students?" "Whitmore, I didn't say that. Don't twist my words. You people always—" Angela slammed her fist down on the table. "That's enough." Dorsey paused the audio. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting. Jalen spoke, voice steady. "We're suing. Not just her. The school, the board, the district." Dorsey nodded. "We'll file under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Discrimination based on race, plus emotional trauma, public humiliation, and violation of student protection rights." Angela inhaled sharply. "We're going to war with an entire institution." Jalen looked between them. "Then let's burn it down." Word spread quickly. Some teachers at Prescott Ridge were quietly supportive, slipping notes into Jalen's locker that read, "Stay strong, or we believe you." Others avoided eye contact, afraid of being pulled into the storm. The student body split down the middle. Some wore black t-shirts with "Justice for Jalen" on them. Others called him a distraction, accusing him of tearing the school apart. Someone defaced his locker with the word "liar" in red marker. Meanwhile, Ms. Whitmore's supporters grew louder. Online forums called her a patriot under fire. A GoFundMe appeared titled, "Support a Dedicated Educator Wrongfully Accused." It raised $9,000 in 2 days. But the hate mail she received was real too. Some emails called her a modern-day overseer. Others called for her resignation. A brick was thrown through her mailbox one night. Her lawyer began doing interviews, painting her as a victim of the woke mob. Whitmore herself? Silent. No statements, no appearances, no apology, just silent. Until one morning, Principal McCain received an unexpected envelope at the front office. Inside, a subpoena, stamped and signed. Jalen Rivers was suing Prescott Ridge High School, the administration, and Diane Whitmore for racial discrimination and psychological damage. McCain read the paperwork twice, then picked up the phone. "Get the district legal team," he said grimly. "We've got a problem." Moments later, a second subpoena arrived, this one demanding every internal email between staff about Jalen, and one from the superintendent's inbox stood out. Whatever happens, keep this quiet. We can't afford another lawsuit. The subpoena hit like a thunderclap inside the Prescott Ridge Unified School District's main office. Within hours of its delivery, the atmosphere shifted from brittle denial to quiet panic. Conference rooms were booked back to back. Internal emails were flagged. Legal counsel huddled behind closed doors. Everyone knew this wasn't just about one teacher anymore. This was about the system. In an emergency meeting held that same evening, district officials convened behind frosted glass inside a soundproof boardroom. There were no students present, no parents, just 7 board members, 2 district attorneys, the superintendent, and a PR consultant hired that morning. Superintendent Martin Creeley, a man more politician than educator, leaned forward with laced fingers. "This has the potential to destroy careers," he said flatly. "And not just Whitmore's. If we allow this lawsuit to proceed unchecked, we're looking at millions in liability and a permanent stain on this district's reputation." Board member Jeanette Harris, the only person of color on the panel, shifted uncomfortably. "With all due respect, our concern shouldn't be the institution's reputation. It should be the student who was publicly humiliated for speaking." Creeley didn't flinch. "This isn't about right or wrong, it's about damage control." Silence followed, heavy and sickening. The district attorney slid a packet across the table. "We propose a settlement. Confidential. Fast. No admission of guilt. We bury it." He walks away with a check. Jeanette's face paled. "So we're going to pay him to stay quiet." Creeley nodded. "And keep Miss Whitmore's name out of further headlines." Unbeknownst to them, just one room over, a sympathetic teacher, Mr. Elias Tran, an English instructor and quiet observer of institutional rot, had left his phone on the table, screen face down but recording. He hadn't planned it, but when he overheard phrases like optics, silence, and containment, something inside him snapped. He didn't know if he was brave or just tired of watching injustice get tucked neatly beneath bureaucracy. Either way, he uploaded the audio file that night. The leak hit the internet before sunrise. By 9 a.m., the audio was viral. Headlines exploded. District plans secret payoff to silence black teens lawsuit. Caught on tape, Prescott Ridge officials discuss burying racism complaint. Education or PR. Inside the district's dirty playbook. Local media camped outside the school gates. National outlets requested interviews. Commentators debated whether Jalen's case was a civil rights inflection point or a symptom of a cancel culture run amok. At the center of it all, Jalen remained suspended. He hadn't stepped foot back into Prescott Ridge since the day he was handcuffed. Officially, his status was under review pending the investigation. Unofficially, he was being iced out. Removed. Invisible. Out of sight. Out of liability. Dorsey had muttered when the latest district memo came in. Classic maneuver. But the world outside wasn't forgetting. A crowd of over 200 gathered outside Prescott Ridge that weekend. Teachers, students, parents, activists. Some held signs reading, "Speaking while black is not a crime," and "Protect students, not reputation." Angela stood at the front, megaphone in hand, her voice calm but piercing. "My son asked a question, and for that he was silenced, shackled, and slandered. If that's your definition of discipline, this school is failing more than just him." Inside the building, tensions rose daily. Students were split down ideological fault lines. Some whispered words of encouragement to Jalen's friends. "Tell him we've got his back." Others made snide jokes in the hallway. "Bet he's gonna sue us for breathing too loud next." One student anonymously posted on the school subreddit, "He's turning into a martyr for no reason. Just another race baiter trying to cash out." The words burned when Jalen read them, even if he pretended not to care. But what hurt more was the silence from those he'd once trusted. Classmates, teachers, coaches, all now conveniently neutral. Mrs. Whitmore, however, was anything but silent. From her private residence miles away, secluded, yet not quite hidden, she began staging her own comeback. With the help of a conservative PR firm, she released a statement to a sympathetic talk show. "This has been the hardest time of my life. I've given 20 years to that school, and one video taken out of context destroyed it all. I'm not racist. I was scared. The media has turned me into a villain." She sobbed softly on camera. "I have family. I have children watching this. And now, we live in fear." The segment went viral, but not the way she'd hoped. Twitter erupted with rage. "Fear? Try being cuffed in front of your classmates for asking a question." Her attempt to reframe the narrative, only deepened the divide. She gained new supporters, many from far-right groups who claimed she was a casualty of political correctness. But the broader public wasn't buying it. And then came the envelope. It was left on the Rivers' front porch. No return address, no stamp. Inside, just one photo.
Ms. Whitmore.
Standing proudly at a far-right rally in 2017. Smiling beside a Confederate flag. Wearing a t-shirt that read, "Protect the South, honor the past." On the back of the photo, a handwritten note. "She's been this way. You just finally caught her." Jalen stared at the photo, rage simmering beneath the surface. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sudden sharp clarity that the woman who'd humiliated him wasn't hiding anything. She never had. She believed everything she did was justified. And now, they had the proof. As Jalen handed the photo to Dorsey, the attorney's phone buzzed. He looked down, eyes narrowing. "You need to see this," he said, turning the screen. An email leak had just surfaced. Ms. Whitmore had filed a defamation lawsuit against Jalen. The lawsuit Ms. Whitmore filed against Jalen sent a fresh ripple through an already boiling public narrative. It was textbook deflection, accused the victim of defamation, weaponized the public backlash, and demand silence in return for peace. But it backfired. Instead of burying the story, it reignited it. Civil rights attorney Malcolm Dorsey gathered the legal team in his downtown Richmond office, whiteboards scrawled with arrows, timelines, and red-marked legal references. At the center of the strategy wall, circled 3 times, was a phrase Jalen had muttered in frustration. "They said I looked like a threat." Dorsey tapped the phrase with a marker. "This is where we hit them," he said. "Let's show America what that threat actually looks like on paper." They didn't just build a legal case. They built a statistical indictment, public records, FOIA requests, education department data, peer-reviewed studies. After 2 weeks of gathering, they had what they needed, and it was devastating. Black students in Virginia public schools were 4.3 times more likely to be referred to law enforcement than white students. 70% of those referrals came from schools with fewer than 15% black enrollment. Prescott Ridge High had a disciplinary record showing that out of 28 total law enforcement incidents in the past 2 years, 19 involved black students, who made up only 6% of the student body. The numbers weren't just alarming, they were undeniable. Angela stared at the spreadsheet laid out on their kitchen table. "It wasn't just Jalen," she whispered. "It never was." Dorsey nodded. "They've been criminalizing black children for years. Your son just happened to be caught on camera." Jalen, sitting beside them, barely spoke. He scrolled silently through social media on his phone. Since Whitmore's countersuit dropped, the online noise had grown louder, uglier. Anonymous accounts questioned his motives. Some accused him of orchestrating the entire thing for clout. Others posted cropped images of him with red circles and arrows, trying to prove he looked aggressive. One user wrote, "If he looked threatening, then maybe he was." That comment stuck. He read it 10 times. But what came next changed everything. Dorsey's team released a report to the media titled, "The Threat They See: How America Polices Black Students." It wasn't just dry numbers. It was living testimony. The report featured anonymous interviews with black students, current and former, who shared eerily familiar experiences. "She told me my posture was intimidating. He said my voice carried too much street energy. I got sent to the office for raising my hand too fast. One teacher flinched when I walked past her desk." Each story was emotional, specific, and devastating. The pattern was too obvious to ignore. The media response flipped almost overnight. Major outlets that had once given Whitmore space to tell her side now released critical exposes. Decades of disciplinary disparities at Prescott Ridge. The numbers behind the bias. He was a student, not a suspect. Even major late-night talk shows began referencing Jalen's case, using it as a stark example of embedded systemic racism in education. The tipping point came when a CNN town hall featured Jalen's voice. Not just as a victim, but as a voice of clarity. He sat on a small stage, back straight, eyes tired but steady. A moderator asked, "What would you say to people who still think this was just a misunderstanding?" Jalen paused before answering. "I wish it was a misunderstanding. I wish it was random. But it's not. I got arrested for being black and informed in a classroom. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a pattern, and if we don't see it for what it is, more students like me will be cuffed for speaking truth." The clip was replayed thousands of times. People across the country, teachers, parents, politicians, began tweeting the phrase, "It's not a misunderstanding. It's a pattern." Jalen's face appeared on protest signs in D.C., Chicago, Atlanta. Angela watched her son on television, in newspapers, even on posters outside their local grocery store. But Jalen never let it change him. He didn't want celebrity. He wanted change. So he started speaking at student rallies, community forums, school board protests. With every speech, he carried the weight of the unseen, the unheard. His voice grew sharper, his stories more focused. "I wasn't the first," he told one crowd. "I was just the first one who got filmed." One evening, as Dorsey's office reviewed depositions, an unexpected email landed in his inbox. Subject: "I want to help, but you can't use my name." The body of the message was short, almost too vague to be real. But the attached document was explosive, an internal memo from 2 years prior, authored by none other than Ms. Whitmore. It was a written behavioral flag submitted to the school administration about a black student who asked her to include James Baldwin in a literature unit. The document described the student as belligerent, difficult to manage, and inappropriately focused on race. The teacher never mentioned that the request was made calmly, or that other students had made similar requests, without disciplinary referral. Below the document was a simple typed sentence: "I saved this because I knew one day it would matter. But I can't go public. I'm still employed. I have a family." The sender signed only as a concerned educator. Dorsey leaned back in his chair, stunned. This wasn't just more proof. It was patterned, documented racism, embedded into the school's internal records, hidden in plain sight. Later that night, as Jalen sat at the window watching the streetlights flicker, Dorsey broke the news gently. "We have someone from inside the school," he said. "They're willing to give us everything. Emails, memos, but they need protection." Jalen looked up, cautious. "Are they a teacher?" Dorsey nodded. Jalen's voice was quiet. "Then we protect them. Whatever it takes." Dorsey hesitated before adding, "If we get enough from them, we won't just win the lawsuit. We'll blow the lid off the whole district." Jalen nodded slowly, his fists clenching in his lap. It wasn't just about him anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. As they prepared to meet the anonymous staffer the next day, Dorsey's assistant rushed in. "You need to see this," she said breathlessly. She held out a laptop showing a newly leaked recording, this time of Ms. Whitmore, laughing with another teacher. "I can't wait till this blows over. That boy's gonna be forgotten in a month." The morning after, the leaked audio of Ms. Whitmore's mocking laugh spread online like wildfire. A strange quiet fell over Prescott Ridge. The building, once wrapped in smug confidence, now felt hollowed out, its walls echoing with the fallout of every secret now surfacing in public. But that silence was short-lived. Just before noon, Dorsey's legal assistant, Brianna Cole, received a second encrypted email from the same anonymous school staffer who had previously provided the memo. This time, the subject line was chilling in its simplicity. "You need to see this." Inside was a zip file, password protected. When Brianna entered the code provided in the follow-up message, Wells 2019, a collection of emails spilled across her screen. The sender, Diane Whitmore. The recipient, Gregory Adler, a senior English teacher and longtime colleague. The tone, brutally casual, cold, confident. The first email read, "If one more student lectures me on injustice during class, I swear I'll need wine for breakfast. Half of them can't write a proper sentence, but they think they're Malcolm X." Another, "This new generation's obsession with victimhood is exhausting. Every conversation has to be about race. Maybe if their parents focused more on reading than rallies, we'd be getting somewhere." And then the most damning, "We need a cultural correction, Greg. These kids need to learn how to assimilate or be left behind. Respect for authority, respect for structure. No more of this identity nonsense." Attached to the email were notes about multiple students, including Jalen, mocking their names, clothes, and even hairstyles. Dorsey read the email chain 3 times before calling Angela and Jalen. "These aren't microaggressions," he said flatly. "This is targeted racism." Written down, in plain text. Angela's hands trembled as she scrolled through the PDFs on the iPad. She mocked his name. "She mocked who he is," Jalen replied, voice hardening. This was never about a question in class. This was always about control. Brianna had already contacted the cybersecurity firm handling email verification. Within 2 hours, the documents were authenticated. The timestamps matched. The headers were clean, the IPs confirmed. No doubt, the emails were real. And now, it was time to release them. The emails broke online just before the 6 o'clock news. A national investigative outlet posted them first with the headline, "Exclusive, Racist Emails from Virginia Teacher Reveal Pattern of Abuse." The article included screenshots, full excerpts, and a brutal summary of the systemic pattern of racial bias Whitmore had perpetrated, and the school had allowed to fester. Within minutes, the emails went viral. Late-night hosts roasted her mercilessly. Talk show pundits debated whether she should face criminal charges. Education columnists called for the resignation of multiple school board members who had failed to act when prior complaints surfaced. And the public? Outrage boiled over. Fire Whitmore now began trending within the hour. Petitions calling for her immediate termination gathered hundreds of thousands of signatures. A change.org page demanding state-level oversight of Prescott Ridge's administration reached 1.2 million supporters in under 24. One parent wrote on Facebook, "My son had her in 9th grade. He told me once she said he spoke too urban for AP English. I didn't believe him. I do now." Even those who had previously stood behind her began quietly backing away. Gregory Adler, her email correspondent, released a cowardly statement denying any malicious intent and suggesting his replies had been taken out of context. But the damage was done. He was placed on immediate leave, pending investigation. The district, under mounting federal scrutiny, could no longer delay. The Office for Civil Rights from the U.S. Department of Education announced it would be launching a formal inquiry into Prescott Ridge for violations of federal anti-discrimination laws. Superintendent Creeley, the same man who once spoke only in damage control riddles, issued a somber press conference statement. "We are disturbed and deeply saddened by the content of the emails that have come to light. This does not reflect the values of our district. We are cooperating fully with federal authorities." But the public didn't want sorrow. They wanted accountability. And at the center of it all, Jalen, once a nameless student in a room full of indifference, was now a national symbol for youth resistance against educational racism. Journalists requested interviews daily. Jalen's story was picked up by PBS, The Atlantic, and The Washington Post. His speech at a youth activism summit aired nationally, where he ended with a chilling line. "If they can call me a threat for asking a question, what do they call the students they don't want us to see? The ones they erase without cameras?" Applause erupted. But back home, the cost of attention still lingered. Jalen still hadn't returned to school. His suspension had technically expired, but there had been no official invitation to return. No formal apology, just silence. And Miss Whitmore? She vanished. Her social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all deleted in the span of 1 hour. Her LinkedIn scrubbed, phone number disconnected. News crews showed up at her listed address only to find an empty driveway and shuttered blinds. Neighbors claimed she left in the middle of the night. No forwarding address. No statement. Nothing. Angela stared at the screen that morning, watching as the media speculated her whereabouts. "She ran," she said almost to herself. "She ran like a guilty woman." Jalen nodded, but his eyes were elsewhere. Because he knew something she didn't. Running wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a reckoning. That afternoon, Dorsey received a certified envelope, marked confidential legal notice. Inside, a signed affidavit from a former assistant principal, claiming that Ms. Whitmore's behavior had been flagged 3 years earlier, but the records had been deliberately erased from her file. The certified envelope sat on Dorsey's desk like it was ticking. Jalen and Angela leaned forward as he opened it carefully, revealing the signed affidavit inside. The words were typed in cold, legal language, but what they revealed burned hot. "To whom it may concern, during my tenure as assistant principal at Prescott Ridge High School, 2018-2021, I personally documented several incidents involving Ms. Diane Whitmore and students of color, including but not limited to unsubstantiated disciplinary referrals, classroom disruptions rooted in cultural targeting, and racially coded commentary. These reports were filed through the proper channels but were systematically removed from Ms. Whitmore's personnel file after administrative review. I was instructed by senior officials to let it go for the sake of optics. I have kept copies for personal protection. They are enclosed herein." Signed, Harriet N. Collins. It was a grenade in document form. And it didn't just indict Ms. Whitmore, it pulled the entire school board into the blast radius. Dorsey looked up. "This is it," he said. "We're no longer talking about negligence. This is conspiracy. They didn't just tolerate her behavior. They erased the evidence." Jalen's jaw clenched. They made me doubt myself. Made me feel like I was overreacting. And the whole time they knew. Angela exhaled slowly, hand over her heart. Now we burn the whole rotten system down. But just as the walls began closing in on Miss Whitmore, she struck back. Out of nowhere, a press conference was announced. It was held not in Virginia but in Texas, orchestrated by a powerhouse legal firm, known for defending controversial figures and reframing narratives. There at a sleek podium flanked by U.S. flags and camera crews, Whitmore's new lead attorney, Gordon R. Blaine, stood stone-faced as he read from prepared remarks. Ms. Diane Whitmore is not hiding. She is seeking refuge from the cyber harassment and reputational assassination fueled by a biased media campaign and manipulated footage. We are filing a countersuit against Jalen Rivers for defamation of character, intentional emotional distress, and malicious interference with her right to work. Gasps echoed through the press room. Blaine continued, "This is not a case of racism. This is a case of cancel culture spiraling into judicial abuse. Ms. Whitmore has received death threats. Her children are being followed. She is not the perpetrator. She is the victim." And just like that, the media machine exploded again. Right-wing pundits hailed her as a martyr. Think pieces cropped up overnight defending her. Hashtags like "Stand with Whitmore" and "Stop Cancel Mob Justice" appeared like counterattacks in a digital war. But the momentum didn't last. The leaked emails, the recordings, the whistleblower affidavit. None of it could be unseen. Even her defenders couldn't explain them away. And now, with multiple subpoenas delivered, the legal path was clear. The case was going to trial, and the judge had ruled it would be televised. The court set the date for November. It would be the trial of the year in the education world, broadcast live on multiple networks. Jalen, once a quiet honor student from suburban Virginia, now found himself preparing for a courtroom war with national eyes watching. Behind the scenes, things began to crack. 3 school board members resigned within 2 weeks of the subpoenas. One cited mental health, another cited family reasons. The third left without comment, deleting all social media before doing so. The school district released a vague public statement acknowledging internal transitions and pledging a commitment to equity. A phrase so overused it rang hollow. Back home, Jalen was slipping. The emotional weight was unrelenting. Every morning brought new headlines, new speculations, new pressure. His grades dropped. He stopped going to club meetings. He rarely left the house. Angela watched it all with growing fear. "We can pull out," she said softly one night. "We can stop. Let someone else carry it forward." Jalen shook his head, eyes dull. "No, I have to finish what they started." He would pace at night, rehearsing testimony aloud, then stare at the ceiling in silence, unable to sleep. Dorsey began bringing in trauma counselors. One reminded him, "You're not just fighting for justice, you're fighting while wounded." But Jalen also saw what was happening outside his bubble. Protesters still gathered weekly at Prescott Ridge. Students now walked out of classes with signs. A group of alumni formed a new nonprofit focused on Black student advocacy in public schools. The Rivers Coalition. Public opinion was no longer just on Jalen's side. It was marching with him. Then came the pre-trial hearing. Dorsey, Angela and Jalen sat in the courtroom as the judge, a sharp-eyed Black woman named Judge Leona Banks, reviewed both lawsuits, Jalen's original civil rights suit and Ms. Whitmore's defamation countersuit. She listened patiently, measured both arguments, then spoke in a tone that could cut steel. "This is a case that goes beyond one incident. It speaks to the structural tensions of our time, how race is seen, heard, and punished in public institutions. Therefore, I am ruling in favor of full transparency." She turned her gaze toward Jalen. "You will testify in person, Mr. Rivers." Then toward the back row, where Whitmore sat, pale and stiff in a designer blazer. "And so will the defendant." Gasps filled the room. The court believes it is essential that both parties come face to face. The cameras will roll. Let the world see what happens when truth meets silence. Jalen's stomach tightened. Angela reached for his hand. Whitmore didn't blink, but her lawyer's jaw visibly clenched. Outside, protesters erupted into cheers as news broke. Inside, Jalen wasn't cheering. He was trembling, because now, the final confrontation was coming. As the courtroom cleared, Dorsey received a call. The whistleblower had just shared one last file, an audio recording of a secret training session where Whitmore advised new teachers, "When in doubt, document everything about the Black kids. They're the ones who'll cause trouble later." The courtroom was cold, far colder than Jalen expected. Not in temperature but in tone. Every movement echoed too loudly. Every whisper cut too sharply. The walls felt tight, not just with people but with pressure. Decades of unspoken truths hanging between the flags and polished wood. Cameras were already rolling when he stepped in. A few gasps slipped through the crowd, not from fame, but from gravity. This wasn't celebrity. This was history walking into the room. Angela held his arm tightly as they entered, though she knew the real weight he carried no one could hold for him. Ms. Whitmore was already seated at the defendant's table. She looked smaller than before. Her once pristine confidence had dulled into stiff silence, but the carefully pressed navy suit, the pearl necklace, and the tight bun said everything she wouldn't. She came to perform innocent. She didn't look at Jalen. Not once. Judge Leona Banks opened the session with a slow, deliberate tone. This case is not about emotion, she began, but make no mistake, it is emotional. It touches the core of what education, authority, and bias mean in America. Then she turned to the plaintiff's table. Mr. Rivers, the floor is yours. Dorsey stood beside Jalen, but didn't guide him. He didn't need to. Jalen rose, walked to the witness stand, and took the oath with a calm that defied the trembling inside his chest. Then he began. I was sitting in my chair. That's where it started. His voice was steady, but every word carried ache. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't standing. I asked a question. About history. About Reconstruction. About truth. He paused, scanning the jury, then the audience. I was 17. Honor student. Never been in trouble. But that day, all she saw was a threat. He looked straight at Ms. Whitmore. Her eyes flickered, just once, but her jaw stayed clenched. She didn't just call security. She called the police. She said she felt unsafe. She said I made her feel unsafe. Because I used my voice. Silence swallowed the room. She didn't see Jalen Rivers that day. She saw a stereotype, a danger, something to be controlled. His voice cracked slightly, but he kept going. You know what it's like to be handcuffed in front of your friends, your classmates? To hear them say nothing? To feel like everything you've done to prove you don't fit their story doesn't matter? A woman in the audience wiped her eyes. I wasn't a person to her. I was a disruption. I wasn't a student. I was a problem. He took a breath, then added quietly, and now I know, I never stood a chance in her classroom. Ms. Whitmore shifted in her seat, but still she said nothing. The prosecution played the video again, the one that had gone viral. The silence in the room grew colder with every frame. Jalen. Calm. Whitmore escalating. The call to night. The arrival of the officers.
The cuffs.
The silence. The shame. Then came the emails. Read aloud like confessions from a ghost. You all blend in when you sit in the back. Cultural correction. Don't let them dominate the room. Each line, each phrase, stripping away any pretense of neutrality. The defense attempted to recover. Miss Whitmore's attorney, Blaine, stood and pointed to Jalen's social media posts, edited screenshots out of context. A clip of Jalen speaking at a protest, his fist in the air. He's aggressive, Blaine insisted. He uses rhetoric. He stirs emotion. This isn't about a question in class. It's about a student who turned a moment into a movement at this teacher's expense. But then the video played again. And again. The courtroom didn't need a rebuttal. The testimonies followed. Tamika Wells, Mr. Tran, former students. The anonymous assistant principal, appearing behind a screen, voice altered, still too afraid to be fully seen. One after another they painted the same picture. Years of gaslighting, discipline disguised as control, praise handed out by race, and not merit. The jury listened, eyes narrowed, arms crossed, faces taut with disbelief that this had gone unchecked for so long. And through it all, Ms. Whitmore remained expressionless. She never cried, never apologized, never once looked at Jalen as he sat across from her, dissecting every inch of the pain she had authored. But her silence screamed. The final day of testimony arrived. It was Jalen's again. Dorsey asked one question. What do you want from this case? Jalen looked to the jury. I don't want revenge, he said. I want acknowledgement. I want them to say what happened to me was wrong, and to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. His voice shook slightly. I want to walk into a classroom and know I'm not being judged before I open my mouth. He looked to the judge. That's all. The room exhaled. Judge Banks nodded. The court will now enter deliberation. 2 days passed. 2 long, echoing days. Outside the courthouse, people held vigils. Students chanted. Protesters danced and cried in the same breath. Inside, Jalen paced, barely sleeping. Angela watched him like a mother watching a storm circle above her child. Unable to pull it away, only able to hold him when it struck. And then, finally, the jury re-entered the courtroom. The courtroom stood. Jalen inhaled slowly, feeling every beat of his heart like thunder. The jury foreperson, a middle-aged black woman, with piercing clarity in her eyes, held a sheet of paper. She stood. The room froze. She unfolded the verdict and spoke. We, the jury, find the defendant, Miss Diane Whitmore. But she paused, choking slightly on her words. The entire courtroom leaned in. And then, from the back row, an unexpected voice shouted, "Stop the verdict. I have new evidence." The shout fractured the courtroom like glass under pressure. "Stop the verdict. I have new evidence." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Cameras panned toward the voice, zooming in on a man pushing past rows of observers. He held a flash drive aloft like it was sacred, his eyes wide, breath ragged. The court bailiff rushed forward, hand instinctively grazing the side of his belt. Judge Banks raised a hand, sharp and commanding. "Let him speak. Identify yourself." The man stopped just shy of the plaintiff's table. "My name is Carlos Velez. I used to be the district's IT supervisor. I was terminated 3 years ago, after I flagged a pattern of deleted emails tied to Miss Whitmore." Dorsey was already on his feet. "Your Honor, we had no knowledge. I was threatened with legal action if I came forward." Carlos interrupted, shaking. "But I couldn't stay quiet. Not after watching that boy speak truth with so much fire. I remembered something I archived without even knowing how important it would become." He handed the flash drive to the court clerk, who passed it to the judge's bench. "Motion to admit late-stage evidence under Emergency Clause 12C, Dorsey said quickly. "This could alter the final decision." Judge Banks hesitated. The courtroom watched her every breath. Finally, she nodded. "We'll pause the verdict. Court is in recess for 1 hour while I review the contents." "Bailiff, clear the room." 1 hour became 2. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had tripled in size. News vans lined the block. Drone cameras buzzed overhead like flies drawn to history. Protest signs filled the air with a strange mix of hope and fury. Inside, Jalen sat beside Angela and Dorsey, hands clasped tightly, eyes locked on the floor. Carlos's flash drive had contained archived emails, not between Whitmore and fellow teachers, but between district administrators, discussing prior complaints and outlining strategies to discredit students labeled as problematic. One line stood out, buried deep in a memo from "We must be cautious. We can't let another Tamika Wells happen. We'll need to pressure the teacher to document anything that paints the student as unstable." Another read, "If Rivers pushes back, Whitmore will handle it. She's reliable." It was the smoking gun they didn't know they needed. When the court reconvened, Judge Banks addressed the room with a tone colder than steel. "There has been a systemic effort to cover up patterns of racial targeting. Evidence now clearly shows Ms. Whitmore acted not just with bias, but with institutional support. This court recognizes a deliberate suppression of student voice and truth." She turned to the jury. "You may now deliver the final verdict." The foreperson stood again, voice unwavering this time. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Miss Diane Whitmore, and the Prescott Ridge Unified School District, guilty of racial discrimination, emotional injury, and malicious suppression of civil rights." Cheers erupted in the gallery. Cameras flashed. Reporters scrambled to beam the headline across every platform in the country. But Jalen sat still, hands clasped, the verdict ringing in his ears like distant thunder. Angela wept beside him. Dorsey leaned over, whispering, "You did it." But Jalen's eyes didn't move. He wasn't done listening. Judge Banks continued. "Mr. Rivers is to be awarded $3.2 million in compensatory damages and $1.8 million in punitive damages. But more importantly, this court demands the following." She outlined reforms with the gravity of commandments: mandatory bias and equity training for all district staff, public release of prior discrimination records, creation of a third-party oversight board, an apology issued to all former students who filed civil rights complaints against the district in the last 10 years, immediate revocation of Ms. Whitmore's teaching license, effective permanently, across state lines. Ms. Whitmore did not speak. She did not cry. She simply stood, trembling slightly, her lawyer whispering instructions in her ear as she was escorted from the courtroom, not in handcuffs but in silence. It wasn't justice in the truest sense. But it was enough for now. The courthouse steps became a stage. Microphones crowded Jalen's path. Reporters barked questions. Cameras flashed, but he said nothing until Angela nodded beside him, and Dorsey stepped aside. Then Jalen spoke, quiet but cutting. "I'm not the first black student to be handcuffed in a classroom. I was just lucky enough that someone filmed it. This wasn't justice for me alone. This was justice for everyone who ever walked into a room and felt erased before they opened their mouth." The crowd roared, but even as they did, even as people hugged, even as chants filled the air, Jalen didn't smile. He turned to Dorsey, eyes locked, voice low. "It's not over." Dorsey raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Jalen reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened an email, a new one, received just minutes earlier. It was from a teacher in a neighboring school district. Subject: "They're doing the same thing here. I have proof." Jalen looked up at the courthouse's towering steps, the flashbulbs still flickering, and knew his next battle had just begun. The courthouse barely had time to settle into silence before Prescott Ridge High tried to reframe the wreckage. Less than 48 hours after the verdict, the district issued a press release announcing the formation of a new diversity and inclusion task force. The language was polished, slick. Words like accountability, healing, and moving forward shimmered from the screen like fresh paint over cracked brick. The committee, they claimed, would be composed of teachers, students, community leaders, and equity consultants. They promised quarterly listening sessions, cultural audits, and even a mural in the school's front hall celebrating student voice. But no one missed what was absent. No mention of systemic racism. No admission of wrongdoing. No apology to Jalen by name. Instead, the district wrote, "We acknowledge that recent events have sparked discomfort and reflection. While we cannot undo the past, we can commit to building a more inclusive future." It read like a brochure for a corporate HR seminar, not an apology. And Jalen wasn't fooled. He sat in the back of his mother's car, watching the school pass through the window. The building looked smaller now, like something he had outgrown. Angela glanced at him. "You sure you don't want to go to the meeting?" "No," he said firmly. "They're not trying to change. They're trying to survive." Instead of returning to Prescott Ridge for his senior year, Jalen had quietly enrolled in Bluefield College Prep, a private, scholarship-backed program designed for marginalized students pursuing college readiness. It was quieter, more personal, and most importantly, it didn't see him as a threat. Still, Prescott Ridge followed him like a shadow. His name was in headlines, essays, documentaries. Some called him brave. Others said he'd overreached. Some parents were furious that their kids had to suffer the consequences of one incident. Others removed their children from the district altogether, citing a lack of trust and transparency. The school board hosted a televised town hall meant to rebuild community trust. It ended with shouting matches between parents, a staged apology from the board, and a walkout by 2 student reps after their microphones were muted. Then came the video apology. Superintendent Creeley stood at a podium, flanked by an American flag, and the school's new diversity consultant, a black woman whose name wasn't even listed on the press release. His speech was slow, deliberate, robotic. "We want to acknowledge the pain experienced by members of our community. While the incident involving Ms. Whitmore has been legally resolved, we understand that healing takes time. Prescott Ridge remains committed to growth, learning, and equity." Not once did he say racism. Not once did he say Jalen Rivers. Jalen watched the video with Angela in silence. "You think he even believes what he's saying?" she asked. "I don't think he cares," Jalen replied. "They're not interested in change. They're interested in optics." His phone buzzed. Another article, this time from an education blog. "When schools perform diversity instead of living it." The article called out the task force for lacking student representation, noted that half the board still hadn't acknowledged the leaked emails, and claimed the district was polishing a broken mirror. But the real twist came 2 weeks later. An anonymous staffer leaked an internal memo to the local news station. It outlined a quiet campaign, greenlit by district leadership, to rebrand Prescott Ridge entirely. The headline that followed ignited outrage. "District plans to change school name, but not its staff." The memo, dated just after the verdict, read, "In an effort to move forward and minimize long-term public relations damage, we propose renaming Prescott Ridge High by next academic year. This shift, paired with new signage, an updated mascot, and diversity-themed branding, will reposition the school's identity without requiring widespread staffing changes. They weren't cleaning house. They were changing logos. No policy overhaul. No administrative accountability. Just a new name over the same foundation. Social media exploded. One student tweeted, "So we're just gonna slap a rainbow logo on the school and pretend it wasn't complicit in racism?" Another posted, "Y'all renamed the school before you even apologized to Jalen properly. This is peak performative." Even national outlets picked it up. The Daily Show ran a segment mocking the rebranding effort with a mock commercial. Introducing Prescott Ridge 2.0, now with 100% more hashtags and 0% accountability. Jalen read the memo, then folded it neatly and slid it into a folder already filled with documents. Emails, court filings, testimonies. Angela watched him from the kitchen. "They still don't get it," she said. "They don't want to get it," Jalen replied, "because if they admit the truth, they have to change everything, and that scares them more than any lawsuit." He looked up, fire smoldering beneath his calm expression. "But I'm not done yet." That night, Jalen received a call from a documentary producer who had been following his story. "We've got footage from inside a staff Zoom call before the verdict. Someone recorded it. You're gonna want to see this." Jalen had always imagined walking across the stage at Prescott Ridge High, with little fanfare, just another face in the crowd, diploma in hand, camera flash in his mother's eyes. That was before the cuffs, before the hashtags, before the courtroom. But now he wasn't just a student. He was a symbol, and he wasn't fading quietly into the background. He was building something that would outlast the scandal. The idea for the nonprofit came one night, while Jalen sat alone in his room, staring at an email from a sophomore in Michigan, who had been suspended for disruptive behavior after asking why her school's Black History Month program included 0 black speakers. "They did to me what they did to you," she wrote. "They made me feel like the enemy in my own classroom." That sentence stuck. It haunted him. So he built something for her, for all of them. Students for Justice launched quietly online. No celebrity endorsements, no massive PR push, just a mission to protect, empower, and elevate students experiencing racial injustice in schools. Within 72 hours, it had over 30,000. The nonprofit offered resources to help students file discrimination complaints, connected them with volunteer lawyers, and trained youth advocates in civil rights law and public speaking. Jalen wasn't just the founder. He was the voice. Within weeks, he was booked to speak at 2 education equity summits, a university panel, and a national teachers conference. And then came the email from D.C. Congressional Committee on Civil Rights and Education. Formal invitation to testify. Jalen sat frozen at his desk when he read it. Not from fear, but from clarity. They weren't inviting a student. They were summoning a witness. His congressional testimony was streamed live. Jalen stood in a gray blazer, no tie, just a pin on his lapel that read, "I am Jalen." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I was arrested for asking a question," he began. But the real crime was the silence that followed, not just in that room, but in every room, like it across the country. This isn't about one teacher. It's about a system that lets those teachers thrive. His words carved into the room like wind against stone. Lawmakers leaned forward. Reporters scribbled. Outside, protesters held signs quoting his speech. Inside, one congresswoman teared up behind her glasses. Afterward, he walked out of the Capitol to a standing ovation. That fall, his story was published. The book Unspoken, the Jalen Rivers story, hit bestseller lists within days. It wasn't just a memoir. It was a call to arms, a mix of personal testimony, student stories, and historical analysis on racialized education trauma. Teachers used it in classrooms, activists used it in workshops. Students passed it around like gospel. And with it came something bigger. A wave. High schoolers in Ohio, Georgia, California, and New York began posting videos of their own stories. Suspensions, silencing, targeting. They used the same phrase, "I am Jalen." The hashtag erupted. "I am Jalen" trended for a week straight. And not just in outrage, in action. Petitions, walkouts, town halls. One school district voted to eliminate in-school policing after 3 students spoke out, using Jalen's story. He watched it all unfold with quiet awe. "What does it feel like?" Angela asked him one night, scrolling through the thousands of posts pouring in. "Terrifying," Jalen replied. "But also, right." He knew what they were building. It wasn't fame. It was resistance. Then the email came. Subject: Netflix original. Adaptation rights inquiry. The message was brief, but unmistakable. They wanted to make his story into a limited series. Scripted, high production value, global distribution. Jalen read it 3 times before calling Dorsey. "You think this is real?" he asked. "Oh, it's real," Dorsey said. "And they're probably not the only ones calling." Jalen nodded slowly, then added, "But I'm not saying yes yet." Dorsey raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "Because I have a condition." Dorsey waited, sensing this wasn't just about creative control or money. Jalen's voice was steady, but firm. "They can have the story, but I want every episode written, directed, or produced by people of color. This isn't just content, it's culture." He paused, then added, "They can't tell my story while silencing people like me behind the camera." Dorsey didn't smile. He nodded, and called it what it was: power. That night, as Jalen prepared to respond to Netflix, his inbox lit up again, this time with a subject line that made him sit straight up. Subject: Diane Whitmore. Unauthorized statement to media. "You need to see that." Jalen stared at the screen, reading the subject line over and over. Subject: Diane Whitmore. Unauthorized statement to media. "You need to see that." The email had come from a freelance journalist he vaguely remembered speaking with months earlier. Attached was a video clip from an obscure late-night podcast. Small audience, low production quality, but what it captured made his stomach churn. Whitmore was speaking without legal counsel present. No script, no polished PR. Just her and a grainy webcam. "I was never racist," she said, voice tired, almost defensive. "I was tired, overworked, and frankly, I was scared. You spend 20 years in a classroom and tell me you don't snap eventually." That boy wasn't innocent. He was political. She leaned closer to the camera, as if the mic wouldn't pick her up otherwise. "They made me into a monster, because it fit the story. Because no one wants to hear that sometimes. A teacher just loses control." The clip ended with her staring straight into the lens. "I lost everything for one mistake. Tell me, is that justice?" Jalen sat in silence. It wasn't the defiance that stung, it was the denial. Even now, after the verdict, the leaks, the public collapse, she was still painting herself as misunderstood, as the victim. He forwarded the clip to Dorsey and Angela, then returned to the matter at hand, the Netflix deal. The streaming giant had sent over their initial offer, complete with a 7-figure sum and a proposed creative team. But one clause struck Jalen immediately: casting, writing, and direction subject to network discretion. He raised it on the first call. "I want creative control," he said, voice steady. "And I want at least 50% of the production team to be people of color, writers, directors, editors, producers." There was a pause on the line, then polite laughter. "We love the passion, Jalen," the executive said, "and of course we're committed to diversity, but we can't guarantee quotas. It's just not how the business works." "It's not a quota," Jalen replied. "It's the bare minimum for authenticity." Another pause. "Well," the executive said, tone tightening, "we believe your story deserves to be told at the highest quality. And that means keeping flexibility. Our priority is excellence. And mine is truth," Jalen said. The call ended without an agreement. Within hours, entertainment blogs were buzzing. Jalen Rivers walks away from Netflix deal over inclusion demands. Activist team turns down millions for creative control. Some criticized him for being idealistic. Others accused him of being ungrateful. But the public? They rallied behind him. "Stand with Jalen" trended on Twitter. Dozens of black filmmakers, writers, and producers voiced support. One post read, "They love our trauma, just not our voice." Jalen said no. "And we should too." Within a week, 2 more studios approached him independent. Smaller budgets, but total creative freedom. One offer stood out: a production company run by black and brown creatives, with a history of telling difficult stories without compromise. Jalen took the meeting, and within 15 minutes he knew, "These are my people." The contract was clear, transparent, collaborative. He would serve as executive producer. He would approve every script. And yes, over 60% of the team would be people of color. When the news broke, Variety ran the headline: "Jalen Rivers finds his voice, and his team." The industry buzzed, but Jalen stayed grounded. For him, this wasn't about lights or cameras. It was about legacy. Filming began in Richmond, just miles from where it all started. The opening scene recreated the moment he raised his hand in Miss Whitmore's classroom, the question that sparked a national reckoning. The set was exact, right down to the chalkboard smudges and crooked flag. Watching it from behind the monitor, Jalen felt his chest tighten. I didn't realize how much it would feel like reliving, he whispered to Angela, standing beside him. She nodded, wrapping an arm around his back. Sometimes healing feels like bleeding first. The cast was fierce. The actor playing Jalen had studied his speech patterns, mannerisms, even his silent rage. The actress playing Miss Whitmore was sharp, brittle, painfully accurate. Every scene was like peeling a layer of history back. And then came the call. His phone buzzed just after they wrapped for the day. Unknown number. He answered without thinking. A soft voice spoke. Jalen, it's Diane. He froze. Angela, watching from a few feet away, immediately picked up on the shift. Why are you calling me? Jalen asked, his voice low. I know I don't deserve your time, she said, pausing. But I've seen what you're doing, the film, the movement, and I want to talk, face to face. He didn't respond. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she added. I just need you to hear something. Before the world finishes telling my version, her voice cracked slightly. Please. Jalen looked at the set behind him, the fake desks, the fake chalkboard, the actor playing a version of himself who hadn't been broken yet. Then he looked out toward the street, past the trailers and wires, to the place where it had all really happened. Where and when, he asked. Ms. Whitmore replied, tomorrow morning, at the school. The real one. No cameras, just you and me. Jalen stood at the entrance of the old Prescott Ridge campus, the morning sun casting long, unforgiving shadows across the cracked sidewalk. The school was quiet now, too quiet. Summer break had emptied it of its usual noise, but it still hummed with ghosts. He hadn't been back since the verdict. Not here, not physically. And now, of all people, she was the one who called him back. He didn't bring his team. No cameras. No mic'd-up shirt collars. Just a notebook tucked under his arm, a bottle of water, and one question pounding in his head. Why now? Inside the front office, a lone janitor gave him a quiet nod before unlocking the classroom they once shared. Room 2. Same walls. Same faded maps. Same clock ticking above the board like it had never moved since that day. Ms. Whitmore was already seated in the chair where he had once sat, where she had once watched him like a threat. Now she looked smaller, her shoulders hunched, hair undone, face bare. She stood when he entered, her voice soft. Thank you for coming. He didn't answer, just took a slow breath and leaned against the far wall. I didn't come here for closure, he said, so let's not pretend we're here to tie up loose ends. She nodded, swallowing hard. I understand. A long silence followed, not heavy, not sharp, just brittle. Then she spoke. I lost everything, she said. Not just my job, my name, my place in this town. My family barely speaks to me. I get hate mail, death threats. Jalen didn't flinch. And I got handcuffed for asking a question. We both have trauma. Only difference is I didn't choose mine. Whitmore closed her eyes, as if bracing herself. I'm not here to defend what I did. I'm here to explain who I was when I did it. Jalen folded his arms, listening. I grew up in a home where silence was safety. She began. My father was a Vietnam vet. Angry, cold, racist in ways I didn't understand until much later. He told me once that fear kept things in order. That the moment you let people speak too freely, you lose control. She paused, eyes wet but not weeping. I carried that into my classroom without knowing it. I saw questions as defiance. I saw students like you as challenges to my control. And I didn't even realize how much of that was about me. She shifted, twisting her hands. It's not an excuse. It's a sickness. One I let fester because I was too proud and too white to question it. Silence again. You want forgiveness? Jalen finally said, voice sharp. She looked up, startled. I wanted understanding, she whispered. Jalen stepped forward, stopping just a few feet from her desk. I understand a lot now, he said. I understand what it feels like to be erased in real time. To have your voice stolen by someone who swore they were there to help you grow. I understand how institutions protect people like you. I understand how deep this goes. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. But understanding doesn't undo the damage. Her breath hitched. "You don't get absolution," he said evenly. "You don't get to clean your conscience here. This isn't a confessional." Tears streamed down her face now, unrestrained. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I really am." He nodded once. "I believe you, but your apology comes after the consequences. Not before." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "You taught me something I'll never forget," he said. "That silence is a choice, and that I'll never choose it again." Then he walked out without slamming the door, without looking back. Outside, the sun was rising higher, the heat of the day creeping in. But he felt light, not because he was healed, but because he hadn't let her rewrite the story. That night he sat in a hotel room, overlooking downtown Richmond. Tomorrow the world would watch the film premiere. The red carpet had been laid. The press was already buzzing. Celebrities, activists, educators, and students from all over the country were flying in. The final edit had gone live to the studio the night before. The title had changed at the last minute, from the incident at Ridge High, to a simpler, sharper name. Room 2, the place where it all broke, and where something new had been built. He sat beside Angela, flipping through messages from students he'd never met. "Your story gave me the courage to file my report. I showed your clip to my teacher," she cried. "They tried to erase us. You turned it into a legacy." Angela nudged him gently. "You nervous?" Jalen exhaled. "No, I'm just aware." She smiled softly. "That's a good thing." He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The movie was done. The premiere was ready. The story, his story, was no longer in anyone's control, but his. As he prepared for the biggest night of his life, a production assistant knocked on the hotel door, breathless. "Jalen, there's a line around the block, and someone's here you didn't expect." He handed over a VIP badge. The name on it stopped Jalen cold. Tamika Wells. The marquee outside the Dominion Theater glowed like a lighthouse cutting through fog. World premiere. 2014. The Jalen Rivers story. Crowds spilled onto the sidewalk. Activists, celebrities, former classmates, teachers, senators, and students who'd flown in from around the country just to witness it. Cameramen jockeyed for space. Microphones waved beneath glistening lights. Paparazzi flanked the velvet ropes, but the night didn't belong to them. It belonged to Jalen. He stepped out of the black SUV wearing a fitted dark suit. No tie. The same lapel pin he'd worn to Congress. "I am Jalen." Behind him stood Angela, radiant and proud. And beside her, Malcolm Dorsey, sharp in all black. But the real shock came from the back of the crowd. Tamika Wells. She wore a simple blue dress, and no makeup. But she may as well have been draped in gold. The moment Jalen saw her, their eyes locked like a breath held too long. "You came," he said, stepping forward. "I had to," she replied. "I watched you carry all of us. It was time I stood behind you." They hugged tight, breathless. The cameras captured it, but neither of them noticed. This wasn't about headlines anymore. It was about history. Inside, the lights dimmed. The film rolled. Scene by scene, silence fell like a blanket over the crowd. Even the harshest critics, those who came out of curiosity or doubt, sat frozen. The recreated footage of the classroom arrest, the emails, the voice recordings, the courtroom scenes. But it was the quiet moments that crushed them. Jalen staring at the ceiling, his hand trembling over his textbook. Angela pacing outside the principal's office, the look on Miss Whitmore's face after the verdict. When the credits began to roll, the silence shattered, not with applause but with tears. Educators wept openly. Students stood in ovation, some holding each other, others simply holding their breath. The applause finally came, and it roared. News anchors began broadcasting live from outside the theater. Within the hour, clips from the premiere flooded social media. A young black teacher from Oakland tweeted, "We need this film in classrooms. Every student, every teacher, every board member." A white high school principal posted, "We're starting a new training series at my school. The first module? Watch 24, reflect, repeat." By midnight, a digital petition was circulating to make 214 part of the national school curriculum. It garnered 300,000 signatures in less than a day. But it wasn't just the education world that felt the tremor. Lawmakers, already tracking the film's growing impact, moved swiftly. Days later, Congress introduced the Rivers Act, a federal education policy aimed at curbing school-based policing, restricting emergency law enforcement calls for nonviolent student behavior, and mandating racial bias training for all K-12 educators. The bill received bipartisan support, a miracle in itself. A senator from Illinois called it the most necessary shift in how we protect, educate, and respect our students in a generation. And at the center of it all, Jalen. At the post-premiere event, he stood behind a podium, hands steady, voice unwavering. "I didn't want to be known for what happened to me," he said. "I wanted to be known for what I chose to do with it." The crowd leaned in. This wasn't about one teacher. It was about all of us. About a system that's been sick for decades, and a generation brave enough to call it out. The classroom isn't neutral. It's a battleground for truth, dignity, and visibility, and no student should ever have to trade their voice to feel safe. He paused, then looked directly into the cameras. "If you've ever been silenced, I hear you. And now, the world does too." The room rose in thunderous applause. Angela wiped her eyes. Tamika stood still, hand over heart. Outside, protesters began chanting, not out of anger this time, but hope. "Justice for Jalen. Justice for all. Justice starts here." The following week, Jalen stood before a different building, newly built. Bright brick, large windows, green banners hanging from the front. Justice Academy, in honor of Jalen Rivers. A school committed to truth, equity, and voice. It wasn't just symbolic. The curriculum had been redesigned to center marginalized voices. Teachers underwent community-led equity training. Students had representation on disciplinary boards. And most importantly, students were safe to question, challenge, and grow. Angela stood beside Jalen as the ribbon was cut. He didn't speak much that day. He didn't have to. His name was carved into stone, not just on the school's facade, but in the stories of students around the nation who had once been erased. That night, back at home, Jalen sifted through mail, thank you cards, speaking invites, donation checks for Students for Justice. Then he found a small white envelope, with no return address. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper, handwritten. "Dear Jalen, I'm a teacher in Mississippi. I watched your film twice. I cried the second time, because it just happened again. Different town, different student, but the same fear, the same silence. This time a 15-year-old boy asked about segregation in science class. The teacher called him combative. Security was called. I reported it. They're trying to bury it. Please, tell me what to do." Jalen folded the letter carefully, then picked up his phone and dialed Dorsey. "You still have those forms for district accountability tracking?" he asked. "Always," Dorsey replied. Jalen nodded to himself, then opened his laptop. As he typed his reply to the Mississippi teacher, a new alert popped up, an anonymous message through the Students for Justice website. "We need your help. They just expelled my son for asking why there are no black authors in English class. I think they're trying to silence him too." And below it, State, Alabama. If you've ever felt the weight of silence after speaking your truth, if you've seen injustice and been told to sit quietly, then you know this story isn't just about Jalen. It's about all of us. Type yes if you believe.